I have with me in the studio still Professor Bola Akintola, Director General, Bolitech Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Dr. Ndidi Nwaneri, Public Policy Consultant and Visiting Scholar at the Loyola University, Chicago, in the United States, and Professor Victor Ariole, Professor of French and Francophone Studies at the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Well, very quickly, Dr. Nwaneri, let me start with you. We had as our guest the Deputy President of the Nigerian Labour Congress, who is also the General Secretary of the National Union of Electricity Employees, and he was reflecting on challenges with regard to labor. Yesterday being Workers' Day internationally and also here in Nigeria. And he raised quite a number of issues about the plight of Nigerian workers, and now yesterday was a day of lamentation. What's your response to some of the issues that he raised with regard to labor and workers' plight in Nigeria?
Thank you very much for having me, Dr. Abati. Good evening. It's really tragic, but again, my position with regards to what people go through in Nigeria and what the situation is that a lot of the things that we talk about are actually symptoms. There's no way organized labor in Nigeria is going to do well if we have a situation where when we have governance issues, when we have historically problematic issues, for instance, when were the laws written. I was surprised when he was talking about how, I'm trying to remember right now, something about money compensation. He was talking about how a lot of, for instance, the Workers' Compensation Act, right? And he also talked about the Employee Act. Two issues that he raised, or two issues that I'd like to highlight. First and foremost, if we have galloping inflation like we have had, and we have devaluation issues where a dollar is approaching 500 naira, I feel that we should have mechanisms in place to protect people who earn locally. That is number one. Number two is, if we have laws that are supposed to be protecting organized labor, and those laws are designed in such a way that sees the world as static. In other words, it's not designed in a way that recognizes that things change. So, for instance, he mentioned that it didn't take HIV/AIDS into consideration. It could not cater to dynamic things happening in society, certainly totally comatose with regards to COVID, for instance. Then we have an endemic challenge. Another thing I'd like to point out is, what happened to all, now when I hear NLC, I'm actually thinking it's an umbrella organization for every other group, but apparently it's not. So the question he raised, which is a valid question, the issue of cooperation among all the people that work, right? Is it that we cannot get ourselves together, the working community in Nigeria, to actually put pressure on the state or governance or the people that are responsible for governance to yield better results? I could have told you for free by the end of April that any Labor Day celebration will be a situation of lamentation, because things are really, really poor for workers. And he mentioned that. So I'm going to stop now and let other people contribute to this issue. Thank you. Okay, over to you, Professor Akintola. I know you would like to talk about the issue with electricity tariff and petrol refining, because pensioners' interest, as a pensioner yourself.
Yeah, I think Dr. Nwaneri raised one critical point that will need greater emphasis. It is important to go back to history for us to understand it. I think it was on July 14, 1889, when the first International Congress of the Socialist Parties in Europe now decided that May 1st of every year should be celebrated in order to mark, know the words, international unity and solidarity. The purpose of
Karl Marx and Lenin,
precisely.
workers of the world, unite.
So, this purpose of international solidarity and unity is meant to organize, strengthen unity in force. So, Dr. Nwaneri, by thinking that the NLC is an umbrella organization, he was right initially, because NLC was an umbrella for all of them before the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, with a government influence, divided the NLC, giving back to the TUC. And now the implication
And
for what we are
the
discussing.
ULC.
Yes, precisely. Now, the importance of what we are discussing in this case is that when the labor union is divided against itself, why will every May 1 not be a day of lamentation? I quite agree. Now, when we are talking about pension, we are talking about electricity, etc. When pension is irregularly paid, the record has it that, look, the federal government borrowed about 6.34 billion out of the 8.5. The federal government had borrowed that. So you are now borrowing pensioners' money for political governance. Now you can understand the criticality of the problem we are having. And in this case, what is happening? When you look at what our guest,
Joe Ajero.
Deputy Joe Ajero, yes, pointed to, which I think that, look, he generally provided an explication of the situation without raising controversies.
Well, on that note, Professor Akintenewa, let's take this commercial break, and then when we return, I'll come back to you, and the conversation will continue. We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. I see here with me in the studio, Professor Bola Akintenewa, Director General, Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Dr. Ndidi Nwaneri, Public Policy Consultant and Visiting Scholar, Loyola University, Chicago in the United States, and Professor Victor Ariole, Professor of French and Francophone Studies at the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Well, Prof. Akintenewa, let me come back to you before we went on that break. You were talking about the very important subject of pensioners and, their entitlements, their benefits, and now the federal government had borrowed a substantial part of, their benefits.
Yes, precisely. When money earmarked, money meant for the purposes of pensioners. Now, instead of allowing the money to accrue and have interest, the government is borrowing it. Now, I ask myself, what prevents the government from borrowing from other sources? Why should it be workers, earnings set aside for the purposes of ensuring the welfare and the well-being of the society? I have problem with that. Another thing is that when we are looking at the problem of workers, you raised earlier on during your discussion with Ajero, leadership of the labor union itself. Why is it that NLC is talking about save workers, save the life of workers at work? And then the theme of the TUC is different. While NLC is seen to be pleading, begging, very submissive, TUC came with an intellectual, subject of discussion, looking at how to address these problems in the future. There are two different, but necessarily complementary, if we want to take it like that. There is NLC who is ready, and the Agaro made it clear that it was a day of lamentation. But that is not the situational reality with the position taken by the TUC, the Trade Union Congress. I think, for instance, let me see what their own topic was. They were talking about methodologies. They are trying to identify the problems and the problematics in such a way now that they are preparing themselves for the challenges of the future. So when we are talking about May 1, in terms of international solidarity and unity that are pointed to as the purpose of May 1, you will discover that the labor unions in Nigeria are not well coordinated.
Well, okay, Prof. I will go to Professor Ariole at this point, but you know that Ajero himself pointed out that particularly at the subnational level, some of the leaders of labor are not as effective as they should be because they've been compromised by the state governors. But then, of course, there's also the problem at the national level, which he admitted, and he said, well, he will not say labor is not guilty of certain omissions and that they will work on those issues. But Professor Ariole, quickly.
Well, it's still an issue of divide and rule strategy of the governors and the governed, and they're trying to prove that we are in a zoo regime where, the fittest of the strongest must always have his way. And the idea of having a labor union is to really protect the weaker ones who are basically at NLC level. I don't even want to bring in TUC here because TUC seems to be the in-between. Either you can't see them as a part of the employees or part of the employers. They are in between. And the NLC, basically where the labor force stands, supposed to be united, and they should not be allowed to go into divide and rule politics or be seen in the divide and rule politics which the government really had introduced. As that today we know labor is divided. And so there is no way they can be in unity to protect their own rights or what they need. And we know that 30,000 minimum wage is just of no use in terms of galloping inflation we have in Nigeria. In other realms, they are protected from those galloping inflations. The moment the government sees that the basket food of item that is required for someone to live a basic life is going up, the government quickly, raise the minimum wage or try to find a way to cushion the effect of the galloping inflation. It doesn't even need the NLC to fight for it. And we are talking about 63 million labor force, which they say Nigeria has about 33% of them are now unemployed. And there is no basic unemployment rights for any Nigerian, like we have it in US or elsewhere, where if you are not working and you are registered, at least you earn some amount to keep yourself going. We don't have that in Nigeria. And I expect this government that had come in as a government of the social order, if you like, not necessarily government of the rich or the bourgeois, because sometimes people have right to say PDP is the government of the bourgeois people or the rich people. But the APC, I expect them to be government that is more interested in the workers, especially in the image of the president, who claimed to be the president of the people. And I expect the president of Nigeria to wake up and say, look, you cannot treat workers this way we are treating them, because I believe in what the workers can do. And I am, essentially, if you like, a worker before becoming the president of Nigeria. And it is not happening. So the inflation is eating deep into the minimum wage you say you are giving the workers. And the electricity is going up. and road, even fuel is being hiked up, which will all make the 30,000 minimum wage uneventful. And so government should come in. It's not necessarily trying to get the NLC to be united. Government should be responsible and feel that if you have 63 million workforce, we should take care of them. Otherwise, the strategy of poverty reduction has no meaning when you can't think of what to do to make 63 million Nigerian workers feel humanistically part of Nigeria. Otherwise, they look like animals being pushed here and there, like we push heads, here and there, and then somebody claims it's a government. You're a government when you can't even think of how best to position 63 million Nigerians to be of what and to continue working for the best of Nigerian interests in terms of adding value to what we have. And that's very, very unfortunate.
Well, Professor Akintanewa, there's something you want to respond to, but
yes.
very quickly, in 1 minute. I want to move on to the next topic.
It's because of the importance of the themes. I was trying to recall that the theme for the NLC was save lives at work. Save lives at work. That already is pleading. Whereas for the TUC, the theme is COVID-19 pandemic, social and economic crisis. The subtitle is challenges for decent jobs, social protection, and people's welfare. If you compare the two, the attitudinal disposition of the two labor unions, completely different.
Well, really, in reality, there's no contradiction, because when the NLC talked about save lives at work, one of the sub-themes they had there was addressing the challenge of COVID-19 as a workplace disease.
Yes,
and they talked about occupational health and safety. They talked about inflation. So if you look at the two themes, they are interconnected. But it was a case of TUC playing up the COVID-19 aspect of it, because it was one of the issues they talked about.
TUC looks at the impact of COVID-19 pandemic as a basis for projecting to the future.
Yeah, but if NLC is saying COVID-19 is a workplace disease and that government needs to pay more attention to it, and they're saying the same thing.
They may be saying the same thing. In terms of methodological framework, it will be different.
Anyway, Prof, let's split hairs over this.
I don't normally believe
let's move on.
TUC will be in total support of NLC, whatever be the case.
Anyway.
It's just a matter of...
Yes, they are divided. They are
divided, no doubt about that.
Anyway, let's move on. Let's take our next subject. And Dr. Nwaneri, I'm going to come to you on this because it's about public policy. The federal government has approved a new policy on national poverty reduction and growth strategy to address worsening poverty in the country. Speaking after the Federal Executive Council meeting, presidential spokesman Femi Adesina said the government is concerned about the impoverishment of Nigerians and has therefore directed Vice President Yemi Osinbajo to chair a steering committee that will provide guidance for the implementation of the policy, adding that an approval has also been given for the adoption of the strategy in the 2021 to 2025 Medium-Term National Development Plan and Agenda 2050.
The Federal Executive Council noted the worsening poverty situation in the country and the efforts of the federal government to redress that situation. It's not as if government is not aware that there's poverty in the land, but things have been done. And one of it is this national poverty reduction with growth strategy that was presented today. The council also noted that the president had pledged to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years. Actually, by June 12 this year, that promise will be 2 years old. It was noted that it is work in progress, and it is work that will get done.
Okay, Dr. Nwaneri, you are the public policy consultant. That's one of your areas. every time we're told we're going to lift 100 million people out of poverty, we've just been told that it's a work in progress. Now, this particular national poverty reduction through growth strategy is a major input that the Presidential Advisory Committee on the economy has made, since it was, established. So why is it that these policies do not work? And all we get with regard to poverty reduction is rhetoric. And interestingly, this was one of the things Mr. Joe Ajero commented upon. But before I ask you to make your contribution, let's take another quick break here on This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show. When we return, Dr. Nwaneri will come back to you. We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show here on the Arise News Channel. I still have with me in the studio Professor Bola Akintenuwa, Dr. Ndidi Nwaneri, and Professor Victor Ariole. Well, Dr. Nwaneri, over to you. The question I had asked you about public policy and problems with implementation and what looks like repetitiveness, and no results, more or less. Although we're told that poverty reduction in Nigeria is a work in progress. Maybe we'll get there by 2050.
2050.
Hello?
So,
yeah.
Dr. Abati, you keep setting me up and asking me trick questions. That's number one. The second thing is that you have been you're both judge and jury. You just asked me a question and you made an assessment of the results of it. So, but that doesn't mean I don't agree with you. I completely agree with you. It is exhausting listening to. So, first thing I'd like to ask the state is, what is the difference between the National Economic Growth Recovery Plan and the National Poverty Recovery through Economic Growth Plan? We're playing around with words. Nigerians have been poor for a long time. Our poverty rate has been growing. Part of the reason we cannot manage it is because, and this has nothing to do with an administration, two things. The first thing is that year in, year out, we don't realize that, or maybe we recognize it, but it just doesn't happen. The way you reduce, so you don't reduce poverty within a political administration. I'm going to say that again. In a country of 200 million people, there's no way you will reduce poverty in 4 years. It's not going to happen. So I'm also talking to Nigerians, and Nigerians with these expectations, because the reason we fall for it is because we think it's actually going to happen. A politician gets up and he says, oh, in 4 years' time, I'm going to do this, this, and that. When the current administration said we're going to reduce poverty by 100 million Nigerians, or we're going to pull 100 million Nigerians out of poverty, nobody asked them, or maybe somebody did, but I didn't hear anybody asking that. How many people are in Nigeria to start with? How did you get your poverty numbers? Is it an estimate? How do you even define poverty? Are you taking the definition of poverty that is denominated in dollars, and you're going to use that as your poverty denomination? A lot of questions were not answered. So for me, it was political rhetoric, right? And we took it seriously. The press takes it seriously. They report on it. It's as if somebody, I almost reverted to pidgin English, but Dr. Abati, I promise you I will not do that. So when matter catch me for neck, now pidgin I did speak. So I'm not going to go there this time, but it's very upsetting that 2 years ago you say to me that you acknowledge as the state in your second administration that there are 100 million Nigerians that are living in poverty. And you have enough time to write a paper. But let's not go there. Now, about this policy. It is very bad, even as a professional on my part, it's very wrong of me to compare one society with another. Definitely not an economically prosperous society with another. And definitely not comparing the US with Nigeria. That is not right. It's like comparing apples and oranges. You don't want to do that because what are you really comparing? The culture is different, history is different. But I'd like to point out one thing. So within all of this, within this apology of I don't want to compare, a few days, look, we just came out of COVID, okay? Or I hope we're coming out of it, though the doctors say that we're on our third wave. Now, there is the whole world has gone through this crisis, so every government is going to get up and try and do something, right? But the framing of this policy, I find it problematic as well. Yes, you are going to do something about COVID. I hope you're going to do something about COVID because everybody is doing something about recovering from COVID economically. But you see, in the US, they announced something like this, and the first thing the president did was that he went to Congress. He went to say, this is what I want to do. We didn't do that. It's almost as if by decree we have decided that this is the policy that is going to be enacted. And so for me, this is another layer of me giving me cause. Now, I'm not saying that is what happened, but you're giving a social policy person like me cause to wonder that, is this first of all, you didn't even bother to change the names much. National Economic Growth Recovery Plan, National Poverty Recovery through Economic Growth Plan, okay? You did not say anything about COVID. You take it directly, you decree it, and you say to me, this is what you're going to do. So my question is, legally, how are you going to push this through? Did you get the buy-in of the public? Did you put us in a position where we're questioning the content of what you have presented? Who is going to push this? You're not going to push it through the presidency. It's people like you and me, like the last gentleman, our guest said, his grandmother. Those are the ones that will carry the issue and pull themselves out of poverty. What you're going to do is create an enabling environment. So this is again top-down, not bottom-up. I think I've used up too much time. I'd like to talk about it some more, but let me give others a chance to pitch in.
Well, Professor Ariole.
You see, what Dr. Waneri mentioned, enabling environment, and that's all people are expecting from a government. A responsible government should put up, in business they say it's a level playing ground. The moment that level playing ground is not there, we'll just be beating about the bush. And for Nigeria, we know, the moment you don't have energy, what are you talking about in terms of economic growth? The energy position is not there. There is no good education. Females are still undermined in terms of going to school. So I'm worried. And what is again, very, very, will I call it stupidity of all this nomenclature, is that Nigeria failed MDG. MDG is Millennium Development Goal. We failed that woefully. Now there is SDG with 17 agenda. We are still nowhere. And we can't even plan how far we are going to calculate the SDG progress because we are not there. And if we had really planned, the United Nations has already set SDG. If we're able to really work towards getting some result of SDG, we'll be talking of lifting people out of poverty. Now, the energy process of SDG, we don't have any enabling ground to lift Nigerians towards having sufficient or worthy energy to boost their production capacity. We don't have good education to get the women to come into education to help them. Housing, they say we have 17 million housing deficit. How I wish the government would just put its mind on building 17 million houses and allow Nigerians to occupy the 17 million houses and find a way to help themselves and see whether they cannot add value to Nigerian productive level. Because when people are not sleeping under the bridges and whatever, where is the energy, where is the capacity to work and move the nation forward? We can see that the government has no plan of enabling environment to get people to. Nigerians are not beggars. They just want enabling environment to allow them to work. And the enabling school atmosphere, the educational process. The moment those things are not there, these are the basic. You cannot live to 100 million people out of, you can't even live to 10 million people out of poverty in 5 years, talk of 100 million. You know what it means? Brazil did it with Yulu, and the man is in prison now. With Lula, rather. And the man is in prison now, which means even some people opposed him while he was trying to get the Brazilians out of poverty. And he did it very well. And we know what he put in place. Education in Brazil was nice. Agricultural process in Brazil was nice. Female students were fully
under the Bosa Familia.
Very, very, and with yourself, who came after him, did well.
Dilma
yourself did well.
His chief of staff.
So that's plan, and it's continuous. And we see how it worked in Brazil. So Nigeria, there is no plan. We can't see any planning process, and then we are talking of lifting 100 million. Please, I hope somebody will advise the president to stop talking about lifting 100 million people out of poverty, because it's not possible. It cannot happen with no enabling environment. Cannot happen. Yes.
Prof, I see you are very passionate about this.
No, it cannot happen.
But I'm sure you don't include yourself among the suffering poor.
Why wouldn't I include myself? If I tell you my salary and you tell me how many people on my neck, including my 2 grandmothers on my neck, and what do you mean?
Anyway, on that note about grandmothers who are on Professor Ariole's neck, we'll take another short break here on This Day Live, the Sunday talk show. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Still with me here in the studio are Professor Bola Akintenwa, Director General, Bolitak Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies, Dr. Ndidi Nwaneri, Public Policy Consultant and a visiting scholar at the Loyola University, Chicago in the United States, and Professor Victor Ariole, Professor of French and Francophone Studies at the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Well, before we went on break, we were talking about poverty reduction strategies. So, Professor Akintenwa, let me come to you quickly before we take our next subject.
I do agree, but only to 50% with Dr. Nwaneri and Professor Ariole, and then 50% to disagree. So I have mixed feelings. First of all, Dr. Nwaneri asked the question, what's the difference between what we used to have and now? That probably is a question of
nomenclature.
Nomenclature alone. They are not the same. I disagree because if you are talking about poverty eradication as distinct from poverty reduction, you will discover that they do not mean the same thing. Eradication means there will not be a situation of poverty in the land. When you are talking about reduction, you are not totally eliminating it. You are only trying to reduce, the extent. Look at it. National poverty reduction with growth strategy. What does that mean in terms of analysis? It simply tells, one, that you are only going to reduce only. You admit that you are not capable of totally eradicating it.
Well, nobody has talked about poverty eradication.
No.
Did anybody talk about that?
Look at it now. This topic says reduction.
Yeah.
Reduction means you do not want to eradicate.
Okay. So what's your point? Are you asking for eradication?
No. I'm just trying to draw attention to the implication of the theme itself, to suggest that when they say with growth strategy, it means you now want to reduce poverty, but the means of doing so will be growing, have a growth strategy.
Economic growth.
Economic growth.
Now, it may be political growth, it may be cultural growth, it can be economic growth. But because if you say economic growth, for instance, they have talked about having
laughing.
They are talking, growth is numerical, it's putting certain instrumentalities in place. That's what it means. Yes. So in this case, for instance, the government has told us that they are going to have a fund, a mechanism to fund that. They are going to put some mechanisms there. We can understand. But the bottom line is that when you put with growth strategy, that means that you are not going to address other means. It's only through economic growth. In other words, you see, the beauty of this French school of thought in explicating issues like this, as distinct from the Anglo-Saxon approach, is what we are seeing. So I do not believe that, in spite of the good points raised by the two scholars, in this case, you must look critically at what the government is selling to the public. You cannot say there is no plan. The plan might have not been explained. I agree with Dr. Nwaneri by saying that you cannot eradicate, you cannot reduce meaningfully poverty in 4 years. that we need more regimes. That is why the federal government itself, in this case, is proposing a bill that will enable sustainability of that particular project. So when you look at it, that now where I look at it, the federal government had done trader money. We have had a school feeding program. We have had all manners of poverty reduction. Please, you are a living witness. When we went to Libya, whenever Muammar Gaddafi organized any international summit, he will build houses, thousands. Now, after the summit, they will distribute, allocate to Libyans, one by one, well furnished as they are. That is one form of poverty reduction. I submit here that no amount of strategy can reduce poverty if it is not addressed within a holistic framework. She raised Dr. Waneri raised the issue of environment. I quite agree. The environmental conditionings, all right, will determine the extent to which you can reduce or even eradicate. The bottom line is that here, we are making the environmental conditions very difficult to live. And we are talking about reducing.
Very harsh.
You cannot talk about reducing poverty on the one hand while you are making life difficult for the people. This is the issue.
Well, unemployment rate is 33.3%. Food inflation is 23.3%. Headline inflation is about 18%. Well, how about dealing with that first?
I wonder.
You know, with a strategy. Well, thank you.
We are going
Let's
nowhere.
move on. Let's go to Somalia. Somalia's President Muhammadu Buhari, popularly known as Farmajo, says he will not attempt to extend his term by 2 years, bowing to domestic and international pressure after clashes in the capital, Mogadishu. The president's term expired in February, but the country failed to hold elections as planned. Earlier this month, the lower house of parliament voted to extend Mohammed's term. However, the Senate rejected the move, provoking a political crisis. Commanders in the police and the military rebelled at the announcement, while rival groups of the security forces fortified positions, raising fears of heavy fighting and a security vacuum that could possibly be exploited by Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab fighters. In a televised statement, the president did not discuss the opposition, but denounced unnamed individuals and foreign entities who he says have no aim other than to destabilize the country. Well, let me start with you, Professor Ariole. Somalia. There's still the fear of clan-based violence, erupting. And 2 out of the 5 regions specifically opposed Farmajo. Also, opposition leaders were against him. But that country has not been able to hold civilian elections since 1991. And in February, he wanted to extend his tenure, but he faced this opposition. And now, well, even with this, will there be peace in Somalia?
He knows that what happened to Saad Barre is about happening to him. He will soon flee the capital, and that's exactly what happened to Saad Barre. If you are not obeying, the clannish interests, which is why I feel Somalia is somehow what Nigeria should think of learning from, so that we don't have clannish groups leading a whole country. Somalia is led by clannish headers, Somalians in Ethiopia, Somalians in Kenya, even extended to Somalians in Yemen, which is crossing the Indian Ocean. So it's a country that almost the whole world is looking out for in terms of, either keeping peace there or creating more problems there, knowing very well that their being together could help Africa, but somehow, even as homogeneous as they are as people, the same religion, the same tribe almost, 80% the same tribe, they still have all these skirmishes for almost 30 years. There have been up to 12 succession of leaders in Somalia, and still no peace. And there are about 2.6 million, United Nations mentioned, internally displaced people in Somalia. And some people sometimes mention Nigeria and they say we should not go the Somalian way. And it is necessary for the whole Africa, as I always say. African Union should be interested in what goes on in Somalia. And getting Somalia to have a relative peace could help. Because for now, we can see that what Al-Shabaab has been doing in Somalia is extending to Kenya. And as I'm talking to you, Mozambique is suffering from what is happening in that region with insurrection in Palmas, we know, and that's Africa. So it is necessary to really call that president to order. Whatever name he call himself, I expect him to. That former Joe you are mentioning, I think is a Freemason name. His real name is Mohammed. Mohammed
Abdullahi Mohammed.
Yes, Mohammed Abdullahi is his, yes. That former Joyce has something to do with Freemason, and we have to really be careful about that.
What do you know about
certainly they have names that are attached to them, and then you know. I'm not saying it's a bad organization, but within East and Central Africa, we know there are some links. It's not a good organization as far as I'm concerned. But
no, we're not discussing Freemason.
Yeah,
just make your point.
Yes, we are talking about peace in both Central and East Africa, and Somalia is in East Africa, and we know they have been creating problems with Al-Shabaab group. Even when Yemen is beyond the Indian Ocean, they have interest in what goes on in Somalia. And that also gives some outside interest, connection to what is going, because they have ship and cargoes crossing within that Gulf of Eden. And that Gulf is where most of the goods that go into the western side of this world, like America and Europe, cross through. And so they will be concerned. And we know that most of the people who are known as sea pirates are from within Somalian region. And so that Africa should really wake up and stabilize that particular region, that particular country, especially Somalia.
Professor Akinterewa, your turn, your take.
Yeah, when Professor Ariole is tracing the genesis of the problem to clannish issues, he is right, but that is not what we should be addressing. The issue is, if he says Nigerians should learn from Somalia, I will agree. We must always learn lessons from elsewhere. But the issue is that Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed is the troubleshooter. If he had not provided a basis for clannish interests, then the trouble will not be there. What did he do? First of all...
So you mean he's a troublemaker?
Of course.
Because a troubleshooter tries to make peace?
No.
Okay.
I won't agree. Okay. You see, what led to it? Attempt was made. They went through the lower house, the House of Representatives, which voted in favor of extending his 4-year tenure by 2 years.
Yeah, because the law in Somalia actually provides for that. That if, elections cannot be held, the president's tenure can be extended.
I am very conversant with that point.
Yeah.
The matter was thrown to the Senate. The Senate voted against it. Order and counter-order. The resultant is point there is the disorder. But the issue is that when you, for instance, want to extend your tenure, please, I have always argued that if any government is not able to do his best within the first years, there is no need being there. If you are lucky, you have a second tenure, it's there. But a situation whereby an African leader will always find a way of prolonging his stay is not acceptable.
You're quite correct, Professor Akinterewa. I'm sure nobody will argue that with you. Now, it's time now for another break here on This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show. We'll be right back. Stay with us. The conversation Continue when we return. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Still with me, I have Professor Bola Akintenwa, Director General, Bolitak Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Dr. Ndidi Nwaneri, Public Policy Consultant and Visiting Scholar at the Loyola University, Chicago, United States. And Professor Victor Ariole, Professor of French and Francophone Studies at the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Well, very quickly, let me come to you, Dr. Nwaneri. Your comments on the situation in Somalia.
Well, the only thing I'm going to add to the comments, the last two comments, I agree with most of what was said, but how is this relevant to us in Nigeria? One of the first things that I'd like to point out is, first of all, they refer to them as clans, not ethnic groups. So you have all these clans. So an upper house makes a decision and it leads to violence. People are actually shooting themselves. Look, let me put this in context. When you read the newspaper, sometimes it doesn't quite hit you. What it means is that because I am Igbo, Dr. Abati, I don't even know where you're from. I'm sorry, with due respect to you. Okay, you're not Igbo, Sha. At least that one I'm sure of. Okay. It means that a decision is made in Abuja and both of us carry lethal weapon and kill ourselves, right? That means that some people did not make it home that evening because of a decision that was made. Mothers were made childless. Fathers, children were made orphans. I'd like to point out two things. The first one is that Nigerians should pay very close attention. All of this that we are carrying matter on top of our heads and beating our chests, the venue of a war always loses. So all this one that we're being careless and making careless rhetoric and deciding that we're quarreling with everybody, oh, he's not from my ethnic group, I think we should learn our lessons from there. The second one is I'd like to point out, and that is a comment that Professor Akintenwa made. He said that I think both speakers actually said this. They said something about how Africans should take a bit more responsibility. So this has the responsibility of managing our space, the responsibility of managing our economies, the responsibility of recognizing that whatever you do within your country is going to affect other people. So that utter irresponsibility that you're seeing in the behavior of the people, including the president himself that wanted to extend his time in office. Thank God he has relented. But I think the relenting, I think is temporary. I think is a political strategy. But I feel that we in Nigeria should be looking at that play out and think about it, that what could have been done differently and what are the consequences of saying, as we say in Nigeria, I no go gree, this Shangri spirit, let everything scatter if I don't win. And I'm going to back off because I'm getting very passionate about this, but let's have other people make comments as well.
Okay, yes, we move on quickly to our next subject, which should be something of interest again to our viewers. U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken has conducted his first visit to African heads of state, even if virtually. Meeting President Muhammadu Buhari, Blinken praised the strong relations between the United States and Nigeria, spanning 6 decades, and pledged to build on that foundation. He went on to say that the two leaders would discuss efforts to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic as well as climate change and post-pandemic economic recovery for both the United States and Africa. Well, there it is, but the big takeaway from that was the comment President Buhari made about AFRICOM and his appeal to the United States to relocate, the command headquarters of the U.S. African Command from Stuttgart in Germany to close to the theater, as he put it, of operations. But I recall that in 2007, Nigeria was one of those African countries that opposed the setting up of the AFRICOM in the Gulf of Guinea. Now President Buhari says it should come, that should be brought to Africa, even if Stuttgart was supposed to be a temporary location because of the objection of many African countries, with the exception of Liberia and Uganda at the time. Professor Akintenwa, you were in government at that time.
You see, it's most unfortunate. Most unfortunate because the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari I've made this point before. The government only thinks after acting. The government is not on record to think before taking action. I say this because, as we have partly pointed out, there were many reasons against the location or relocation of the AFRICOM from Stuttgart to Africa. Many were the countries seeking the relocation to them in Africa. The United States was not interested in that. The United States was interested in Nigeria in particular to play host to the AFRICOM, the African Command. Now, the issue is that when the opposition in Nigeria was very strong, the US government had to suspend the relocation for 10 years. That was as of 2005. Negotiations continued, sending emissaries up to 2007. Why I say it is most unfortunate is that the Buhari administration has not taken the pains, the courage, the patriotism required to look into the records. Why was it that the AFRICOM was rejected? I am not unaware of the situational reality of insecurity now. But when you look at the arguments that, look, bringing AFRICOM to Africa will necessarily impede the development of an African standby force, that Central and West African Maritime Organization had this agenda of ensuring that this type of problem is addressed by them, and looking at the reasons as to why, for instance, the people in Stuttgart in Germany opposed or compelled America to relocate. Please, I think that it is most unfortunate for a president to be discussing this issue. The disaster there is that the president has now brought Nigeria to a level whereby he's now discussing with the minister, Secretary of State. A president and a Secretary of State. What does that mean?
Well, very quickly, Ndidi, let me come to you. We have just a few seconds to go.
Okay, so my first question, thank you. I agree in principle with the last comment, but my first question is, please, what exactly is AFRICOM's coming here to do? I wonder. We have an issue, and the question is, no, think about it. Inside there, so, I mean, there's certain things, I might not be a military person, but I do know that you need to know your terrain. You need to be from there. What we're discussing here is a breakdown of our socio-economic system that has led, and also not having a strong legal system, and that has led to people taking laws into their hands, and banditry has become lucrative. Another thing is inconsistency in policy or not well thought out policy. Now, I hope nobody carries placard to my door, but there's such a thing as precedents. The way we are handling bandits and warlords and Fulani herdsmen, you know, it depends on who you are. That's how you refer to what is going on in Nigeria. The way we handled it, remember the recklessness with which we dealt with South-South, what was happening in River State and Bayelsa State like 15 to 20 years ago. We were reckless with regards to policy. People walked away with that, from that situation with a lot of money. Very few people were prosecuted. Now we are in a situation where we really do not know what to do. And you're talking about Africans, but then again, in fairness, I heard that it's not true that the federal government invited the relocation from Stuttgart to Nigeria. I do not think it was, maybe it was mentioned and taken out of context. I don't think there was a formal appeal that please bring the...
Indeed.
I don't think so.
We've got to go.
I don't know, maybe it's possible.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nwaneri, Professor Ariole, and Professor Akintenewa. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on Arise News. I'm Ruben Abati. For my entire team here in Lagos, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again next Sunday.